Unable to attend the Assisi Conference because I was enduring a month-long afternoon daily radiation treatment, I had to write a story. In the mornings, I would put my laptop into a small backpack and walk to a hotel patio overlooking the North Saskatchewan River and write. The first day I wondered if I would get as far as the front gate of my home. Halfway through the month, I would use a small wheelie suitcase because my shoulders were too sore for the rucksack. Here's the letter I wrote to the gatherers on the other side of the world in the Assisi Conference. Honouring Dr. Mae Wan Ho. I can see the scene. You're all gathered on the patio of the country house, looking out over the Umbrian Valley, breaking into the jewels of golden greens, lavenders in the distance, and the Basilica of St. Mary of the Angels. Without excuse, rather with a deep attachment to life and the recognition of our one globe and the possibility of coherence out across our habitual ideas of space and time, I am imaginatively inserting myself onto your patio to reflect on the work of Dr. Mae Wan Ho and what I consider to be her deep significance, not just for me personally, but for us and our dear Earth. I too am on a patio. This one is of the Hotel MacDonald in Edmonton, Alberta in Canada, and I am looking out over the beautiful North Saskatchewan River as it flows through our city. I ritually come here every morning to reflect, to study and write. It's an enormous effort. Sometimes it takes me almost an hour and a half to get out of the house. I am healing from the trauma of breast cancer. I am always alone at these times. The ritual helps me stabilize myself. The cell phone brigade arrives as I leave. Before I delve into Dr. Ho's work, I have to recount two items I read about in the paper last Sunday as I was sitting on the patio reflecting on Mae Wan Ho's work. The first newspaper article was entitled "Clones for Christmas." This news comes out of the bustling fertility clinic of Severino Antinori, situated not far from the Vatican, described as his lifelong nemesis. Amongst other details, I read that the supposed cloned children he and his team are working to develop will have no genetic inheritance from their mothers. Commenting on the story in general, Mark Siegler, a professor of medicine at the University of Chicago, says, "If what Dr. Antinori claims turns out to be true, he has violated every ethical standard that should govern scientific research." The second article is titled "Spinning Gold from Goats. Spider Silk is Holy Grail." We are told that forged over 400 million years of evolution, spider silk is considered the Holy Grail of performance fibers. It is one of the strongest fibers on Earth, 5 times stronger than steel. Nexia Biotechnologies is producing transgenic goats, which we are told look like ordinary goats, by inserting the spider silk genes into goat embryos. An earlier article in the paper had said that the silk gene had been added to the goat genome through 2 male goats and was designed only to turn on in the mammary glands of lactating females. It was hoped that the bred females will pass on to their daughters the capacity to make silk in their milk. In order to test that this would happen, the young virgin females were injected with hormones to induce them to lactate before being pregnant. We are assured that pregnancies and lactation would thereafter proceed normally. Now, these transgenic goats are being mated with ordinary goats through so-called ordinary mating on a farm outside Montreal and a 65-acre decommissioned military base in Plattsburgh, New York. Nexia Biotechnologies, Inc. is the Canadian company that now raises the goats who will now normally carry the spider silk gene. The article goes on to tell us how biotechnology is harnessing the genetic machinery of nature to create innovative materials, in this case within female goats, for battle armor, medical applications, biodegradable fishing lines, and designer clothes. What a mind-boggling mixture. Jeffrey Turner, Nexia's president and chief executive, says they are trying to mimic what the spider does. He says, "Man always thinks strong things need to be big, but the spider has basically dwarfed what we've done with the petroleum-based materials." He tells us everybody wanted spider silk, but no one could get it. It was an intoxicating molecule, he says, because it resisted an enormous amount of experimentation. And the story of the outcome of this intoxication was told to investors in December of 2000, raising $40 million in one of Canada's largest biotech stock offerings at that time. Without elaborating very much on details, these two articles are bewildering. They portray an unconscious chaos born from nature's myriad and burgeoning patterns, unrelated to and unreflected upon. There is still an all-pervading and inappropriate mechanistic worldview. This does not reveal the deep intelligence of nature's mysterious chaos. In these two articles, we see formal religion, polarized with scientific development, December and Christmas birthing the bizarre, and lots of profit. It is worth noting that Mother Church is unknowingly equated with the Greek goddess Nemesis, goddess of retributive justice or vengeance. I wonder what Yeats says of the beast shuffling to Bethlehem to be born. In the unholy alliances described in the two articles, we further see the mother-daughter bond violated, creature-mother milk bossed around, mother's body and soul truths completely negated. We say grail mysteries inappropriately aligned with heroically named performance and the building of war designer materials. We see both a capacity for mere surface seeing as well as a fascination with hidden exotica. Certainly, there is no mention of there being the possibility of unknown long-term effects resulting from the intoxication of the myth, insisting on conquering nature's deep resistance to the violation of her autonomy and the rape of her boundaries. Into this horrendous and bewildering scene emerges Dr. Mae Wan Ho, a healing and health-giving mercurial vector of nature that allows us to contemplate the mysterious image in the fairy tale of getting the genie back into the bottle. In my mind's eye, I see her on the patio. In her article, The Unholy Alliance, citing the year 1997, Dr. Mae Wan Ho tells us that we, those of us of the street, were waking up to the realization that genetic engineering biotechnology is taking over every aspect of our daily lives. A previous 3-year trickle had by this time become a deluge. We were already well on the way to living in a genetically engineered world where giant, faceless multinational corporations will control every aspect of our lives, from the food we eat to the babies we can conceive and give birth to. She claims that even she was taken by surprise and horror at the fast-galloping takeover, even though so many had been calling with warning since the early 70s. She reminds us that in 1995, Joseph Rotblat, the British physicist who won the 1995 Nobel Prize after battling against nuclear weapons, said that his worry was that advances in science, particularly genetic engineering, processes other than those of nuclear weaponry, but might be more dangerous as a means of mass destruction. I note the year 1997 because, although I had explored Dr. Conforti's work from afar for some time, in the spring of that year I first attended the Assisi Conference in Vermont. It so happened that Dr. Mae Wan Ho presented her work on the viewing of the pulsing, multicoloured vitality of the fruit fly that allows us to see the total organism's live and coherent dance of life. Dr. Mae Wan Ho is in the biology department of the Open University in the UK. Mae Wan Ho knows that how we view nature depends on our underlying worldview, or some call it paradigm. To a large extent, this dictates what is revealed to us. Her technological equipment for imaging the alive and moving organism certainly is a tool that allows us to see the processes of the living organism. And this was new in our history of science. Prior to this, nature has had to be pinned or pulverized in order to be studied. In other words, we've had to kill nature in order to say anything about it. Dr. Mae Wan Ho knows that the fluctuating colours of the organism are a manifestation of the organism, but brought to coloured light by the technology of polarised light microscopy that geologists routinely use to study rock crystals. No colours would be produced if there was a different arrangement, based on a different paradigm. In Mae Wan Ho's laboratory, the so-called observed, the observer, and her technology are in a unified field in deep dialogue. She educates us to realize that living, moving organisms appear crystalline because their activities are perfectly coordinated in a continuum from the macroscopic to the molecular. For us to be aware of this, without recognizing our own lack of coherence, without this deep dialogue, there are far-reaching ramifications. Dr. Mae Wan Ho has been described as the most important writer today in the controversial field of biotechnology. With the wide-ranging knowledge of her long-term field of scholarship, she is able to articulate for us the differences between our DNA technology and conventional breeding techniques. And she tells us of the damage that has already been done. She points out the false teachings and glib assurances. Mae Wan Ho is able to see, recognize, and articulate the difference between two huge archetypal patterns. On the one hand, there is the fatuous, chimeric collective rationalizing that overtly and covertly implies that bounteous and only beneficent biotechnology is merely a seamless continuum of biotechnologies as practiced by human beings in their bread and winemaking and selective breeding since the dawn of civilization. The causal use of language and mythology displays an appropriation of nature's underlying wholeness, as well as an abduction on our deepest spiritual and indigenous teachings. On the other hand, there is the exquisite dance of life that is a process of being an organized and mysterious whole, a truly seamless garment to be prized above any gambling. Dr. Ho's ability to stay with both huge hands, both archetypal, is awesome, wondrous, and truly educative to encounter. Perhaps we need a new Zen koan. Dr. Ho places herself in the dark and potentially overwhelming drama, wondering loud why she, of all people, didn't realize the full import of the situation, even though there were warnings. She tells us too of her own gradual growth in recognition that science really matters in the affairs of the world, how a worldview, unconsciously held, obliges people to shape the world in inhuman ways. I think her honesty here is helpful. She tells us of her own rude awakening, and true to her paradigm of emergence, she tells us something of her growth in consciousness and potency within this field of rudeness. She is calling us to our deepest morality. She is helping us to question our assumptions within science. She is calling us to move beyond trying to make the unhealthy, the violating, to appear as merely more palatable. So many of us cannot imagine the monstrous. It is unthinkable, imponderable. Paralleling her personal story of rude awakenings, she reminds us of the failures that are never discussed. Nearly 300 failed embryos to get one cloned sheep. Indeed, she wants us to pay attention to the failures as much as our successes. They are as important, if not more important, than the easily touted successes. Part of Dr. Ho's ability to bring herself so deeply into the unfolding of the exploring of the deepest mysteries and dramas of life-death, she is a person who is able to witness the slippage of language executed by those in positions of power. It's the sort of slippage and sliding of words, metaphors, and sacred time-honoured indigenous teachings that easily begin to obfuscate the dangerous truth of situations and can begin to cast a somnambulant spell over us. For example, even though we can see from the unfolding story, the emergent pattern, that eventually ordinary goats and transgenic goats do in fact become one and the same, their original differences need to be seen, understood, and appreciated. The full story, the diversified truths and desires of nature, is of the essence and must be seen in its difference from the violence of homogenization. Their inappropriate amalgam, both through word slippage and an unfolding pattern that has not had enough human will brought against it, is indeed an unholy alliance. Mae Wan Ho tells us that it is not too late for us to speak and take action, even though she recognizes that we are encouraged to believe that a certain climate is created to induce us to believe it's too late. It's part of our inherited entropic archetypal world. Mae Wan Ho does not think there is a conspiracy afoot, though she recognizes the dark and destructive forces converging in on us. She understands Susan George's comments that it is the underlying worldview, goals and resulting actions that are at the bottom of things, the unacknowledged archetypes or patterns that are the basis of life or not life. Dr. Ho recognizes how artificially constructed vectors carrying genes into cells, working towards invasion and smuggling often deadly matters into cells. She is moving us, through her deep knowledge and love of science, to help us begin to articulate a paradigm that recognizes the gender biases of our Newtonian norms as they affect us all, and how upsetting nature's defense mechanisms are for industry, and how more and more effort is going into breaking down this self-protective capacity of nature, acknowledging archetypes that are the basis of life or not life. Dr. Mae Wan Ho is someone who understands well the ability of our science and technology to help us learn to appreciate nature's intricacies. This may not be such an obvious statement. Mae Wan Ho, in The Rainbow and the Worm, The Physics of Organisms, talks about science as a quest for the most intimate understanding of nature. It is an adventure of living with unanswered questions. She writes and thinks like a Gnostic. She is interested in her experience of nature. Her satisfaction comes, she says, in keeping the big questions alive. She maintains that it is the enigmas, the mysteries and paradoxes that take hold of the imagination, leading it on the most exquisite dance. Mystery takes hold of imagination and leads it. And so mystery leads to imagination, and imagination leads us into dance. For life, you see, is a process of being an organizing whole. It is a being and an organizing. These are both verbs, and they are verbs that suggest self-soothing being and organizing, creating. A warp and weft, yin and yang. Such a paradoxical system, explains Mae Wan Ho, is open to the environment. It enstructures and organizes itself and its environment by simultaneously enfolding the external environment and spontaneously unfolding its potential into highly reproducible or dynamically stable forms. As I reflect on these quantum truths, it becomes easy to see why the lotus flower has been such a symbol of this process of organic wholeness. When it has grown up out of the mud, it unfolds its beauty on the surface of the water. It enfolds into itself the sunlight, enfolding its petals around its sacred golden center at night time to descend back into the water, only to again unfold its radiance the next day. In its enfolding process, it relates to its yellow sun within and the sun without. It is just like the sun itself that descends, enfolding itself into the dark waters at night time and rises out of the depths of them in the next morning, unfolding its stable form into the blooded light of the new dawn. Why else would the resurrection mysteries of the Christian tradition, first perceived perhaps by Mary Magdalene, be located in the liminal time and space of dawn? In recognizing the necessity for this dialogue, Dr. Mae Wan Ho knows that she stands within her profession as most likely a minority figure. This is true in any profession and any situation. To stand alongside our individual truths, not possessed by them, but be relating to them and expressing them, can be lonely work. Dr. Mae Wan Ho knows too that intercommunication is the key to organic activities. It can proceed rapidly because it, the organism, does not work by a mechanical hierarchy of controllers and controlled, but rather because their activities are perfectly coordinated in a continuum from the macroscopic to the molecular. And they are coordinated cyclically, with the cycles implying perpetual return, which is the secret of organic stability. Such cyclic returning is none other than what the mysteries of divine feminine have spiraled, returning always to the source. This is the archetypal pattern of crucifixion, a return to the earth, and the mysteries of the tomb and the mysteries of matter being buried. And after the return, there is the resuscitation. This is the word that is most likely translation of the Aramaic, not resurrection, but rather resuscitation. The work of the philologist and theologian Father Gunther Schwartz insists that this is so. Even the Greek translation of the original Aramaic means to waken, to get up, to come forth, to present oneself. This sounds more like the understanding of the alchemists who talked about our transformation from being a dead stone to becoming a living philosophical stone. Such a person was someone who had become one with nature's fundamental liveliness. It has more in keeping with the ancient Egyptian mysteries of the underworld experience. Their great book was not the Book of the Dead. It was rather the book of coming forth by day. The story of Mary Magdalene has been brought forward in the last 30 to 50 years as being of she who was in fact Christ's teacher in the final mysteries of entering the matter's truth of cyclic interconnectivity. But of course this is another big story. I am back to my solitary place on the patio, and I hear a middle-aged man yell at a woman whose voice I hadn't heard. "Don't you ever tell me how to take pictures!" The woman demurely left the patio, and the man mumbled into his expensive camera. Mae Wan Ho has not been demurred by this loud and collective voice. She is not overwhelmed. She takes her own pictures, and she offers us many glimpses of science that move us past the vain fantastica and brutalizations of mere chimera, and invites us through into a diaphanous world and fully into the poetry that is the soul of nature.